Hello and welcome to this podcast on medical tax credits. If a taxpayer incurs medical expenses, they are allowed to get a medical tax credit. Now please remember that this medical tax credit is a rebate, so it is deducted from your normal tax. This is not an expense deduction in the calculation of your taxable income. It is a rebate. So that is the first thing that you need to know. So we're going to do this podcast in two parts because the tax credit is quite a big calculation. So in this first podcast, we're going to look at when taxpayers are younger than 65 years of age and no person has a disability. If a person is younger than the age of 65 and no person has a disability, no person being neither the taxpayer nor any of the taxpayer's dependents have a disability, then we're going to calculate the rebates as such. So if the taxpayer contributed to a medical aid fund, he will be able to get a medical schemes fees tax credit. That is a fixed tax credit that they can get, and it's a fixed rate that we use. But please remember, you can only get this medical schemes fees tax credit if you actually contributed and paid a medical aid fund. The next step we're going to do is we can go and calculate the additional medical expense tax credit. And the additional medical expense tax credit is calculated as follows. You can take your medical aid contributions if you had it, and from that you're going to deduct 4 times your medical schemes fees tax credit if you had a medical schemes fees tax credit. And that equals your excess contributions. Your excess contributions cannot be less than 0. It must always be a positive figure. The word excess says it all. To that, we're going to add other qualifying expenses. Other qualifying expenses are expenses like prescription medicines, if you had to pay to visit a doctor, etc. Now, these qualifying expenses need to be paid by the taxpayer, and it must not be refunded by the medical aid fund. If this calculation, so your excess plus your other qualifying expenses, if it exceeds 7.5% of your taxable income, the difference is multiplied with 25%. But if this excess and other qualifying medical expenses is less than 7.5% of your taxable income, you have no additional medical expense tax credit. So let's do an example. Rose is 42 years old and she's married. Her husband and her son are dependents on a medical aid fund, and neither Rose nor any of her dependents have a disability as defined. So in other words, Rose is younger than 65 and there is no disability. Her taxable income amounted to 32800 and her normal tax is correctly calculated as 72923. Her employer contributed 5,000 Rand to the medical aid fund for the full year, and she made the following payments. She had a medical aid contribution for the full year of 20,000 Rand, and she had qualifying medical expenses paid and not refunded by the medical aid fund. My question is that you need to go and calculate the medical tax credits for the current year of assessment. Remember, she's younger than 65 years of age, she has no disability. She contributed to medical aid fund. So the first thing that we need to go and calculate is her medical schemes fees tax credit. Now, the medical schemes fees tax credit is a fixed rate for each person that Rose pays for. So if we just go look here, she pays for her husband and her son. So it's 3 people on the medical aid fund. So we'll use 286 plus 286 plus 192. This 286 and 286 and 192 is given to you in the exam, in the annexure, so you don't have to remember those figures. You're going to go and multiply it with 12. The reason for that is because she contributed for the full year of assessment to this medical aid fund. If she only contributed for 10 months, you would only multiply it with 10. If she only contributed for 8 months, you would only multiply it with 8. And this is deducted as a rebate. You will see from your normal tax, you go and deduct your medical schemes fees tax credit. The next thing that you need to go and calculate is her additional medical expense tax credit if she incurred additional expenses. So for that, the first thing we need to go and do is we need to go and calculate her excess contribution. Excess is always a positive figure, and this is calculated by taking your employer's contribution plus the employee's contribution and deducting 4 times your medical schemes fees tax credit from that, and that is your excess. So we know that she contributed 20,000 Rand, her employer contributed 5,000 Rand, so we can quickly go just look at that. The question, here we say she contributed 20,000 Rand and their employer contributed 5,000 Rand. So her total medical aid contributions is 25,000 Rand. Okay, let's quickly go back there. So all of her medical aid contributions was 25,000 Rand. So from that we need to go and deduct 4 times her medical schemes fees tax credit. Now in the first part, we calculate this medical schemes fees tax credit, and we know that it is 9168. So 4 times 9168, you guys will see, is 36,372. So we need to subtract this total contributions, we need to subtract this 4 times the medical schemes fees tax credit from the total contributions. Now you will see it's going to result in a negative figure, and then our excess is going to be 0. So if it was a positive figure, we would have an excess, but it is not, it's negative, and therefore it is 0. Our next step is to add our other qualifying expenses to our excess. Now we know that our excess is 0. We know that she incurred other qualifying expenses of 30,000 Rand, so we're going to go and do that. Our excess is 0, we add our other qualifying expenses, and we get a subtotal of 30,000 Rand. Now we're going to go and apply a limitation. So our limitation is 7.5% of our taxable income. So if you go and do that quickly, we know that her taxable income is 328. That was given to you in the question. So it's 7.5% of 328 gives us an amount of 24,600. Now the rule is if our excess plus other qualifying expenses is more than this limitation, then we can go and deduct 25% of the difference. Okay, so in this case, it was more. Our excess plus other qualifying expenses was 5,400 Rand more than our limitation, and our additional medical expense tax credit would be 25% of this 5,400. If this limitation was more, let's say it was 35,000 Rand, then we would not have any amount here, and we would not multiply it with 25%. Okay, but in this case, it was more, and therefore our additional medical expense tax credit is 1350. I hope this video course helps you with the application of medical tax credits if a person is younger than 65 with no disability. The second podcast will treat the scenario where the person is older than 65 years or older, or a person has a disability. Bye-bye.